Hello, you're listening to Wait, How Do You Spell That? A Rare Disease podcast. My name is Colby, and I'm the editor here at Patient Worthy. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. And today, I'm happy to welcome a very special guest to our show. Kecia Johnson is an author, music industry veteran, and motivational speaker who was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS in her early 20s, and also with a rare form of stage 3 colorectal cancer at age 35. Kecia has been an outspoken patient advocate who has appeared in OutSmart Magazine, Shoutout Atlanta, many different podcasts, and also a Walgreens ad campaign. Kecia, welcome to the show.
Oh, wow. Thank you for having me. Awesome intro.
Thank you. And thank you so much for taking the time today. I think our audience is really going to enjoy hearing your story. Yeah. And to start off with, would you mind taking us back to when you were diagnosed with HIV/AIDS? That was in 2006 when you were living in Houston. I know you had been hospitalized for pneumonia, which is when the doctor walked in and kind of gave you this life-changing diagnosis. Can you walk us through what happened?
Yes, to be very quite honest with you, it was like it all happened so fast. I ended up having cold flu-like symptoms, and I was actually at a best friend's house, and I just couldn't shake the cold. I thought it was, maybe a flu that had gone wrong, and I ended up getting in the shower, passing out at my friend's house, and then I woke up, and the ambulance, paramedics were there. And by
Gosh.
the time they get me in the ambulance, they try to see if maybe I'm diabetic. They give me like this sugar paste, get me to the hospital. They tell me it's a bacterial infection. And then they send me home. Well, those same symptoms came back and they came back even harder. I had a fever of 105.7. And I couldn't stop shaking. By the time I got to that hospital, my mother took me to the hospital in Katy, Texas. And I was in there for about 3 to 4 weeks. And on that fourth week, they told me that I had the AIDS virus.
Yeah. And I think I remember reading another interview that you did where you said the doctor just walked in and sort of matter-of-factly told you, so how are you treating your HIV/AIDS? And this was obviously news to you. What was going through your mind at the time to receive such a surprise diagnosis?
I was a bit perplexed because she did say to me that they had to bring in different infectious disease doctors because they thought it was lupus. They thought it was so many things, and it was lying dormant in my system. So I was just like, wait, what? I was just so confused. I was like, I've never had any symptoms, or I've never. And the thing is, I'm saying I didn't have symptoms, but when you stop and you're told you have the virus and you kind of like play things back in your mind, you're like, okay, so that was a symptom. That was a symptom.
Hmm.
And it was like you don't really get a chance to process it because they tell you that day, a couple hours later, the health department comes in and you have to fill out paperwork. You have to write down your partners so they can potentially contact your partners, or they want you to potentially get to the bottom of who could have given it to you.
Hmm.
Um, so that was like a lot. I was hooked up to a breathing machine, and they still wanted to roll me out into the next room to sign paperwork, and it was just a lot. It was
Hmm.
a lot to process. But then I was like, if I'm taking it this way, just imagine what others could be taking it like. Because it's a
Hmm.
humiliating experience. I'm going to be very honest. But in that moment, once I got on my medication, I was like, I have to do something about this because this is crazy. Like, I would have never even known it was a symptom if they didn't tell me.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I know one topic that you have discussed before is disparities related to HIV/AIDS as an epidemic. So just to sort of set the scene for our listeners, right? A pandemic like COVID-19, that's across the world. HIV/AIDS is something that is epidemic to different countries and it's at different levels. There are different considerations there. But even within the US, where treatment is relatively readily available, not everyone has the same experiences and access to treatment or experiences with social stigma. Can you expand on that for us?
Absolutely. Man, so I will say this, the health disparities, and I know we'll get into the cancer part, the health disparities that I dealt with HIV versus cancer, it was almost like I was on two different ships, but we were going the same direction, if that makes sense. With HIV, in my beginning, probably like the first 6 months, I had great care. I had an amazing doctor, Dr. Ong, in Katy, Texas. He put me on asked me if I wanted to do almost like a case study, which I was on, and it was harsh on my body, but I was undetectable within 60 days. So going from two T cells having AIDS to that was remarkable. But then I turned 23, and because of, the bill passed, I could no longer be covered by my mom's amazing health
Mhm.
insurance. On top of that, I now had a disease attached to that. So they were going to drop me anyway.
Right.
So then I had to get on state care. So I went from going to this great doctor, being able to pick who I wanted to. I was then going to a clinic. I was in a corner in Houston, Texas, where I kind of shared stalls with trans women who are my sisters, who actually have helped me get through a lot of things. And it was like day and night. And I
Mhm.
was like, how do you guys expect people to live with half-ass care? Excuse my language. And it was like a shock. It was like a culture shock. And it showed just the health disparities, especially when it comes to tax bracket. And it really depends also on the state you're in, is what I've learned through all of this as well. I could go on, but it definitely showed me that it's imperative where I live. It's imperative that I know who my senators are. It's imperative that I know that the health disparities that I face, I can speak on them if I use my voice.
Mhm. And it's a matter of self-advocacy too.
Absolutely. You
Right.
have to speak for yourself. You have to voice. And I learned that throughout my HIV experience, going from different clinics. I started at Hacks Clinic. Hacks Clinic is now something else. It was bought out by a bigger entity. And, now and then went from there to AIDS Healthcare Foundation. So you get to see the difference and you get to see the funding and what it's going to. And again, according to the tax bracket, the lower you are on that bracket, the more disparities you face.
Mhm. Yeah. And to that end, too, treatments, you alluded to some of it there about 6 months after treatment, you were undetectable with the viral load. Treatments for HIV, AIDS have certainly come a long, long way. It's been more than 40 years since it was first described in the early 1980s. Of course, it was a death sentence back then, and it is not that anymore. It's been almost 20 years since you were diagnosed. How do you feel that attitudes have changed toward HIV AIDS during this time, either in the medical field or just socially?
It is crazy. So advocating since 2007 about it, I just did a podcast about it. And I said specifically that after going to a HIV/AIDS conference last year here in DC, I realized that we are in the same space, just a different dress and wardrobe and makeup,
Hmm.
right? So we're still in that same space. Advocacy, there's more advocates, of course. We're in a place to where they are talking about HIV/AIDS left and right. There are commercials and there's this and there's that. But there's also stigmas amongst advocates. And you're like, how does that happen?
Hmm.
It's possible. There's stigma amongst advocates. So we've gotten further in terms of the conversation, more people talking about it. But because there's still stigma that I feel, even as some advocates still, they'll advocate in safe spaces, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
But they won't advocate in the places that need to hear it that are difficult, because then that's when they have to really do that self work, and then they have to relive some things that have gone on. So what that does is it causes us to again still be in the same space talking to each other. Meanwhile, the outside world is still suffering from stigma.
Hmm.
So to answer your question, we're still in the same space. I mean, because there's still so much work to do. And I think we're doing the work in a circle backwards and in another circle type of environment, in a sense.
Gotcha. And tell us about some of the experiences that you've had working as an HIV/AIDS advocate.
I've had some great experiences. I've had some crazy ones. to where I've been told that I was lying about having AIDS. I've been told so much. When I came out as an advocate, as an ambassador, as an influencer about it, I always say that just because I have AIDS, that's not going to stop me from looking good, being pretty. That's what I prided myself on, is, looking good, makeup,
Mhm.
heels, shoes, what have you, because it made me feel good.
Mhm.
And because of that, I was told that I was glorifying HIV AIDS. I was glamorizing it. And I'm like, what is that? What does that even have to do with the price of tea in China? Because I have AIDS, I'm supposed to look sick, act
Right.
sick. And that's what I kind of got. That's the pushback I got when I had a publicist. But when
Mhm.
I had a publicist, my story went on a national, global level. So people were like, I literally had people tell my publicist, I don't believe she has AIDS.
Mm.
Like, it doesn't, like, I think she's doing this for attention. And I'm like, out of all the diseases, why would I choose?
The one that has a lot of social stigma attached to it.
Right. Why
Right.
would I choose that? But again, that goes to show where we are. Like, people still in their mind think
Mhm.
that that's what's supposed to happen. Even with Heidi Broadbent passing away just recently, when she passed away, it was almost like people, I saw some comments were saying, well, she had AIDS. And I'm like, but no, she was supposed to pass away at 5. They
Mhm.
said she wasn't going to see past 5, and she was almost 40. So
Mhm.
that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
But again, we're still in this head of, well, shoot, well, that's what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to die. And so I faced that a lot, but I actually enjoyed it, because even when I had my daughter, people were like, so you have a baby? So does the father know you have it? And I'm like, what is that? What does that mean? Does the father know that I have it?
Right.
And thinking your baby's okay, my baby is healthy. People just still don't know that your child is given an antiretroviral the first week that they're born, to make sure that there's not a thing passed to them.
Mhm.
And if you're undetectable as a mom, you can't pass it.
Right.
So it's just so many things and the knowledge is there, but people just don't care to read it or figure
Mm.
it out or learn about it. So it's like a twilight zone. I feel like I'm in sometimes.
Do you feel like, because it is not such, and I know this was before, your time and your experience as someone living with HIV and AIDS, do you feel like it's a matter of, this was a done deal? This is something that used to be a big issue, but is not a huge issue now. And maybe that's where the misinformation comes from, because people don't understand that there are factors to this that you still have to consider. And the fact that maybe this is not as such of a big deal, socially speaking, is because of how far the treatments have come. So it's kind of a reverse. They're ignorant about this because it's not such a crisis as it used to be. What's your sense about that?
Yeah, I think, and it's one of those things like where they say the media, like media and organizations have a tendency, oh, we've done this. 1.6 million people are in care. And okay, yeah, that's wonderful. But those people are in care, but it's probably double that aren't,
Mm-hmm.
or double that don't want to know. I talk to people all the time who say that they would rather not know than know. That's just, I got too much going on in my life. Like, I don't even want to be able to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's glamorized in terms of the progress we've made. And I'm not saying we have not made any. But what I'm saying is that there's still work to be done, and we cannot just sit and highlight where we are. And I feel like a lot of the progress, to be very quite honest, has been made in the LGBTQIA plus communities
Mm-hmm.
versus, for example, in my culture. They don't want to get tested. It's something they don't want to talk. They'll talk about it if there's a check involved, or if it's a benefit, or if it's, but
Mm-hmm.
if it's just something like we're saying, hey, put your health first, nobody cares. It's just what it is. So it's definitely sensationalized, grandma. It's definitely all of that. And for stunts and shows, I mean, because when you're getting certain amount of funding, you have to show what you're doing. When you're getting a certain amount of funding, whether it's government funding, grants, you have to be able to show and prove what it is that you're doing. And it's a lot more of that going on than actual doing. I will say
Mm-hmm.
that.
I see. And of course, you're not just an HIV/AIDS advocate. You're also a colorectal cancer patient advocate as well. You were diagnosed with anal cancer, which is a rare form of cancer, in 2020. at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you tell us about that time in your life?
That time was different. I had just had a child. She wasn't even two. She was like a year and some change. And so I was like, in essence, a new mom. And I was running a home healthcare business at the time in California, but I was living in Texas. And things were just, things for me were taking off in terms of like, okay, I got this mom thing going. I have my business. I have things like it feels good. And, taking care of myself, working out. And I just started having pains to where I couldn't use the restroom. And that's odd for me because if anybody knows me, the tea, smoothie, salad queen. That's,
Hmm.
I have no problem being regular.
Very
I have no,
regular.
right. Right. I have no problem being irregular. I have no issues with that. So when I started having pain back there, I was like, okay, so what's going on? Like, what's happening? And this started creeping in around April of 2020, and that's when the pandemic really started. That's when the lockdowns really started. And I ended up going to an emergency room in Dallas, Texas, Rockwall, Texas, actually. They were all, secluded due to COVID pandemic, and they literally sent me home with ibuprofen. And I was like, this is something else. So then I go and to another emergency room. They told me it was a hemorrhoid. I go to another emergency room. They tell me it's an anal fistula, and it happens. The pain just kept progressing over months. And so, as we go from April 2020 all the way up until me traveling to three different states and three different cities to get a diagnosis, all the way on August 6th. And I actually flew home to Wisconsin, where I'm originally from. I flew home to drop my daughter off to my mom, and the next day to get up to catch my flight to go home to California to see my doctor. I couldn't move. I was in so much pain in my backside, I couldn't move. So I ended up going to the emergency room there on my hands and knees, crawling in. That's how much
Mm.
pain I was in. I couldn't stand up. And they put me in surgery. They took me to see the colorectal surgeon. She couldn't do a rectal exam because I was in so much pain. They put me in immediate surgery. She came back in and said the pain was a tumor, that it was cancer. And because, it had went for so long, it had traveled to my rectal area. So I had a tumor in my anal canal, and then I had one in my rectal area, and then I had like three in my pelvis. So it was immediate treatment. I didn't even have a chance to think. In my mind, I'm like, I don't want to do treatment in Wisconsin. Like, I'm not supposed to be here. Like,
Hmm.
I don't want to be here. But because of COVID, I couldn't even travel. I was in so much pain, I couldn't even sit on a plane if I wanted to.
Yeah,
So
no choice at that point.
no choice at all. So I had to go into immediate chemo and immediate radiation.
And when people sort of think broadly about cancer, I feel like they tend to focus on the tumor and on the treatment, this neat, clear path from diagnosis to remission, one thing leading after another. And you've already made it clear at this point that there was nothing routine about your diagnosis in general. You had to travel to so many places, you had to advocate for yourself just to get that diagnosis to begin with. One thing that almost every cancer survivor has a story about that doesn't seem to get as much attention is the recovery process. So after that fact, after that milestone, the fact that the very treatments that can put cancer in remission can also have a disabling effect on your body. You have to recover from the treatments, which are essentially, poisoning your body to an extent. Can you talk about your experiences there and what recovery was like?
Oh yeah, I tell people all the time, and I say that to my advocates here in DC. I'm actually at a colorectal colon congress event here in DC, and I talk to my other advocate friends, and I say all the time, I'm telling you, this thing were to ever resurface, we're gonna rethink some things about how we did it because I feel like the treatment was probably the worst part, and the tumor was painful, but the treatment was brutal. I want to say that I want doctors to give patients more of the options that they have. And I didn't learn more about the options that I could have had or asked for until I became an advocate. And I was burned below my waist from radiation. I was sanctioned to do 8 weeks. I could only do 4. I was burned. I think I did 5. I was burned like it was burning me. And I think when people hear radiation, I don't think they realize our microwave is radiation. So if we can cook popcorn in 2 minutes, I was under a radiation machine for 15 minutes. So every day I had to do that, Monday through Friday. And Thursday through Sunday, I did chemo. So I had my machine on the weekends. And then during that time, I was like constantly having to choose to get up every day
Mm-hmm.
while feeling burned or watching my flesh fall off my body. And then they tell you, oh, you'll be a little irritated, we'll give you some gauze and some Aquaphor. And I'm like, this is way beyond gauze and Aquaphor. I ended up being in the burn unit for 2 weeks because I just couldn't take the pain. The pain was just too much. And I ended up having a palliative care team. And
Mm-hmm.
for anyone who doesn't know, palliative care is right before hospice.
Mm-hmm.
So palliative care is to keep you as comfortable as possible. Any medication that you need to be comfortable, they give it until it doesn't work anymore. And then after that, you go to hospice. So during that, for the pain, I was on Oxycontin, oxycodone, and fentanyl, 75 milligrams, and none of it worked. I was in so much pain. I was on Dilaudid. I was on morphine. None of it worked. And I told my nurse, my head of my palliative care team, that I can't do this anymore. I was like, I'm not going to sit here and be in this pain every day. Like I feel like I'm dead. I feel like I'm dying, and
Mm-hmm.
y'all are just doping me up every day on top of chemo going in my body, on top of it was just so many things. And she was like, "Well, I need you to just fight another day." And I'm like, "That's easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
Your rectal and your lower extremity is not on fire."
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up being admitted a couple of times. So one was because I had a bowel obstruction, and the treatment that I received in that hospital was beyond ridiculous. I ended up having to contact the hospital ombudsman, and we had to get the administration involved. It was just crazy. But the treatment definitely took a toll on me, took a toll on my mental health. It took a toll on my spirit. And just, it was points where I was just like, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. Because I'm not going to sit through this burning. And
Mm-hmm.
you tell me that this is going to get the tumor away. But yeah, this is going to cause so much mental trauma from sitting and being burned every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was an experience.
So was there a moment then where you allowed yourself to think, okay, I think I might make it through this? Was there like a moment where that started to ease for you and maybe you saw to see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, so it was so my daughter. So every time I would do treatment or I was at home, I started to lose weight because, of course, the treatment and the medication did, cause me not to have appetite. And I started not to look like myself. And so my daughter didn't want to, my family would be like, go give mommy a hug. And she just didn't want to do it. She
Mm-hmm.
didn't recognize who I was. And that kind of like mentally messed me up. And I was like, okay, no, I'm not going to have my daughter, who I asked for, not know who I am. And I was like, God, we got to figure this out. Like, we got to work this thing out. And I got to get to the other side of this because this little girl is not even 2 yet. And she is not wanting to come to me. She doesn't want to hug me, touch me, kiss. She doesn't want anything. And so that was when I was like, okay, I got to get to the other side of this. So whatever I got to do, I just got to do it. But in that moment, I chose and I told my radiation oncologist that I'm not going to finish radiation treatment. If the tumor is gone, it's gone. As
Mm-hmm.
much fire as you guys have been burning me with, they got to be gone. So I'm not going to take myself through this because if I go through another 3 weeks of this, I'm going to wither away.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't do that for my child. So that's when I was like, oh, like I had to put my mind over the matter because I was like, she's not ready to be left here alone. Like, she's just not. So I have to pull some sort of strength from somewhere to fight through this.
Right. Thank you. That's tough. I'm very sorry that you went through that, Keisha.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah. Right. So turning then just to sort of the matter of colon cancer in general, oncologists and cancer survivors I know have been raising alarm bells in recent years about the fact that the rates of colorectal cancer diagnosis, which was long considered rare in people under the age of 45, they've been going up. A recent famous example of this was the actor Chadwick Boseman, probably best known from Black Panther and other Marvel movies. You know, he was diagnosed with stage 3 colorectal cancer when he was 40 and died just a few years after that. I know you two were diagnosed below the recommended screening age for colorectal cancer. Can you
Yes.
expand on your thoughts here?
Yes, and it's funny you mentioned that because I just was with his wife last night here at Washington, D.C. She was the speaker here at the state capitol and also at an event last night, and we had a time to talk. And she just couldn't believe that I had overcome stage 4
Mm-hmm.
colorectal cancer. She was just like, I'm blown away. But she was like, I understand because he was told at 39, she said that he had stage 3, I believe. And she saw his fight, she saw the pain that he navigated. And one of the things she did say is she was like, she felt bad that she didn't speak up enough. She didn't, for him that, no, he needs a colonoscopy. No, this needs to happen. No. And he told her that sometimes we can be respectful, but sometimes we can't be nice. And she said she realizes that when it comes to colorectal cancer, that in this space, when it comes to our health and early onset, we can't be nice. We have to demand that you respect our health. So if I'm saying to you, something is not right,
Mm-hmm.
I need a colonoscopy. I don't need you to tell me, no, you're not 50. No, it's not covered. No, like it's one of those things that we have to really, really use our voice to fight because at this point, I can tell you now that early onset is just not being taken seriously the way it should be.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, you're someone who has long been an outspoken advocate across these two health challenges in your life. You're also a multidisciplinarian. You've worked in the music industry, you're an author, you're a motivational speaker. I think if anyone's seen a photo of you, it's also immediately clear that you have a great sense of style. Like you said earlier, that's very important to you. It's a way to express yourself, right? Can you talk about the ways in which your experiences as an advocate for HIV, for colorectal cancer, what are some of the ways in which these experiences have changed you as an advocate?
Absolutely. I will say this again, I'll reiterate. I went to a conference last year for HIV/AIDS, and I said because I had gone through my cancer thing, it was almost like the glasses that came off, and I was like, this is smoke and mirrors. Like this whole conference, everything is smoke and mirrors. Like everything is look at us, here's war and HIV/AIDS. We got all this going on, and but you're having parties at night with liquor and all of this, and people are getting drunk, and these are things that kind of perpetuate the promiscuous cycle of kind of why the numbers are high in certain demographics. And I was like, this is crazy. And I didn't take heed to that before years ago. I was just like, yeah, all right, they're doing this. This is great. But it's almost now that I'm stepping outside and I see what really needs to be done, it's like some of the things that we do in terms of, or some of the things that counterparts or organizations do can be counterproductive to the real issue at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And going over to the colorectal cancer side and advocating, it's almost like they really want to do the work, but it's almost like because the higher you get to the top, the thinking is antiquated that some of the new age advocacy has to kind of help with the antiquation, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. So I'm over here on the colorectal side, looking at the HIV side, and I'm like, what are we doing? Like the colorectal cancer side, believe it or not, just in the 2 years that I've been doing it, I've seen like things pass and pivots. And I'm here at Call on Congress where my California counterparts talk to senators today. And They want to sign letters to be a part of a bill to push the age earlier. Like, and I'm like, what is the difference here? Like, what's happening? Why is HIV/AIDS not taking as,
Hmm.
but if you look on the outside looking in, it's portrayed as if it's taken seriously. And so how it shaped me as an advocate is I changed how I speak to people. I've changed how I talk, how I tell my story. Before it was get tested, get tested, get tested, get tested, get tested. That's not even a factor because I'm going to be and even telling someone to get a colonoscopy, I can't tell someone in my culture who's affected the most, a Black man, to get a colonoscopy because the first thing he's going to say, no, I ain't having nobody go back there. I've
Hmm.
had multiple men say that to me.
More
You,
stigma.
it's a stigma. And
Yeah.
even in the LGBTQIA community, if you say, hey, I need you to get a colonoscopy, they're looking at you like, why should I get a colonoscopy? And it's crazy. So I dive deeper into figuring out why don't they care. And a lot of that stands in front of the stigma are generational cycles, mental health, generational traumas. It's stopping people from doing that other stuff we're asking them to do, colonoscopies and things like that. People have this thing that if it doesn't apply, let it fly.
Hmm.
So now it's like I'm choosing to dig deeper than just, hey, early onset, get a colonoscopy, because that's going to go through one ear and out the other in this generation, in this time.
Hmm.
To dig deeper, and I have to have a real conversation about just life in general with people that I'm trying to get across to.
I'd also like to focus on your book for a minute. It was published in 2022, and it's called Cancer Could Never, a
Yeah.
motivational guide to overcoming trauma and illness. What are you hoping that people will take away from reading about your experiences?
I'm really hoping. I was at the lowest point of my life in that writing that book because of the fact that I had to tell myself in that hospital that cancer could never and will ever stop me from doing the things that I've said that I'm going to do, and moreover that I'm called to do. Like I'm put here to do a thing, and I'm not going to let cancer stop me from doing that thing. Being a mom, being a businesswoman, being the world renowned speaker that I aspire to be, I'm not going to let that stop me because of the pain that I'm enduring, like right now. Like, I know it's terrible right now, but if I can just mentally fight past the diagnosis and the pain, I can get to where I am now, 2024. And so that book was me detailing going through all of that. I was going through a separation, battling cancer. I was going through so much. My child's father, he's not in her life, but I had to reach out to him because I had to have that conversation that if I pass away, I need you to sign over your rights because with her being autistic, she needs to be with a responsible individual that's going to really do what's best for her. So those are all things that I had to work through while battling stage 4
Hmm.
cancer. So
Hmm.
all of that is in the book and it details every single thing that I had to battle during cancer. And it's to show people that I know what I went through, but it could never stop me from still having to navigate everyday life and still being able to go after my goals.
So, sort of a guide then that if someone else experiences what you're experiencing, maybe they can come out, on the best foot.
Absolutely, they can. And I even have a playlist in the back. I'm actually working so many things out right now. I have cancer care kits, and my goal is to get partnerships with different hospitals and get these cancer kits inside of hospitals because I have playlists in the back of the book. I have herbal teas that help me, teas that I've mixed together. I also curated an oil for skin that has been damaged with chemo, which I handmade myself. And in those cancer kits, and all that is in the back of the book. So for those who are like, what should I listen to? What music should I listen to help me through this? I have that in the back of the book. What should I drink? What's
Hmm.
good for me during this time when I'm nauseous from chemo? All of that is in the back of the book. So it really is a guide to get through, not just colorectal cancer. I mean, any form of cancer, to be honest.
Yeah. So, what advice then do you have for someone who is going through something similar to what you've experienced, perhaps an unexpected HIV diagnosis or an early cancer diagnosis?
I will say this. It sounds absolutely cliche, but I promise you there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I would summarize it like that because when you're going through that moment, you're like, there's absolutely no way in heck I'm going to ever get through this, like ever. And I know people who have said that, who were diagnosed with, early stage HIV, meaning some you may not even have to take meds if it's caught early enough. But even that, just being attached to that stigma, makes a person want to go and crawl into a hole and get depressed. But there's still light at the end of the tunnel, even in that instance. Colorectal cancer or any cancer, any disease, there's any rare disease, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But moreover, ask what your options are. Don't go into a doctor's office and let them tell you what you're going to do. Get a second opinion. You have a right to do that. And ask, are these all my options? Figure out what works best for you before you put your life and your diagnosis in someone else's hands.
I think that's great advice. So, if people would like to keep up with what you're doing, where's the best place for them to do that?
Everywhere. So I am Kecia J on all platforms. So that's TikTok. I had an amazing TikTok that was hacked, but we started over and we're getting it back up there. But I am Kecia J on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. It's the same all across the board. And if you just want to learn more about me, you can Google I am Kecia J, and everything about me will come up, from my time in the music world to HIV diagnosis to cancer. So just reach out. I'm always open for anyone who may be going through something. DM me, I respond. I'm here. That's what I'm put here to do.
Okay. Well, Kecia, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. We really appreciate you sharing your story, and good luck with your trip to DC.
Oh, well, I thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Wow, the pleasure's all mine. And if you would like to learn more about Kecia and the work she's doing, you can find her, as she said, on Instagram and plenty of other social media platforms under the username I am Kecia J. And we'll leave some links in the show notes for this episode for easy access to those so you can follow along with what Keisha's doing. And remember, you can always keep up with the latest in rare disease news by visiting our website at patientworthy.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, basically all those other platforms where you'll be following Kecia by searching for Patient Worthy on those platforms. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Subscribing ensures you'll automatically receive our new monthly episodes as soon as they come out, and a review or rating really does go a long way toward helping us out. Finally, if you have any questions about the podcast or perhaps an idea for a future episode, you can get in touch with me by sending an email to Colby, that's COLBY, at patientworthy.com. That does it for today's episode. Thank you once again to Kecia Johnson for joining me on the show today. And as always, thank you for listening.